Financial argument. Follow us on YouTube.
The world goes on high alert as the U.S. pushes for World War III. Now, before I get started, I just want to make an announcement. I just placed an interview with Greg Mannarino on the X22 Report Spotlight YouTube channel. So you can go right over to the YouTube channel, just type in X22 Report Spotlight, bring you right to the video, or you can come over to the x22report.com site, scroll down a little bit, look over to the right-hand side, you'll see the video there, or you can go to newssentinel.com, same thing, scroll down a little bit, look over to the right-hand side, you'll see the video there. Let's get into the economic collapse, political and geopolitical news. Now, we realize that the U.S. government, they tell us they're not spying on the American people. They tell us that they're not trying to remove the First Amendment, Second Amendment, Fourth Amendment, and the rest of the amendments, that they believe in the rights of the people. Well, in the past, if you remember, those people who dared to speak out against tyranny, they were spied on, censored, jailed, and put to death. And if you think about it today, what is the U.S. government and many countries doing today? Well, they're doing pretty much the same thing, because today the people are spied on, not just here in the U.S., but in Canada, throughout Europe, Australia, UK. People are censored. Those people who speak out against the government, who have controversial blogs or YouTube channels or anything else, we have a little bit of censorship right now. Countries like Turkey, they really censor people trying to speak out. And of course, you have to remember Erdogan, he was in that line for freedom of speech, freedom of the press, when we had that false flag terrorist attack in France. And we realize now that all of this is being repeated once again. And there are certain things that the government is looking for. And if you're doing them, they will spy on you. They will censor you. They'll even throw you into jail. Now, there are trigger words that the Department of Homeland Security uses while they're monitoring social networks and online media. And they look for different words like lockdown, police, food poisoning, SWAT. And we see right now is they're also looking at those people that are speaking out against the government, who don't agree with the government. If you attend a political rally, the Patriot Act redefined terrorism so broadly that many non-terrorist political activities such as protest marches, demonstrations, and civil disobedience, they were considered potential terrorist acts. And we see today that there are many different instances where the government comes down hard on the people. If you try to express yourself on social media, the FBI, CIA, NSA, and other government agencies are investing in and relying on corporate surveillance technologies. And we know that Twitter and Facebook and many other social media sites, they look for certain keywords. And those people are reported to the government. Because what are they looking for? Well, they're looking for potential extremists. They're looking for those anti-government behavior types. And even if you're a veteran and you served in the military, they have something called Operation Vigilant Eagle. The brainchild of Department of Homeland Security calls for surveillance of military veterans returning from Iraq, Afghanistan, and they characterize them as extremists and potential domestic terrorist threats because they, might be disgruntled, disillusioned, or suffering from psychological effects of the war. No, what they're really afraid of is that these people have the ability to use weaponry. They have war tactics. And they realize that the veterans, they are a force in the United States, and this is why they're spying on those people. If you disagree with law enforcement, we see there's a growing number of government programs that are aimed at identifying, monitoring, and locking up anyone considered potentially dangerous or, mentally ill, of course, according to the government standards. If you're out in public waving a toy gun, an umbrella, a phone, they'll come down hard on you. And there are some instances when they've shot people where they thought it was a weapon. Now, I remember in the past, the police were ordered not to shoot unless shot upon. Today, they shoot first, and then they ask their questions. And we can see how things have completely changed. If you appear pro-gun, pro-freedom, or anti-government, guess what? The government looks at this and says you can be an extremist if you're stockpiling food, ammo, medical supplies, if you fear the economic collapse, if you're buying gold. They believe that you're a terrorist. And we see they're doing this on purpose. They're labeling people. And this is what the government does. Because they need people out there to understand the government is the good people, and these other people, they're the bad people. And this is what government likes to do. They like people to take sides. And they create the illusion that people that want the rights, don't want big government, that want the freedom to talk about governmental issues, that don't agree with the government, they want everyone to look at those people and say, okay, they're crazy whack jobs. And we need to be careful of them. And if you're saying those people are crazy whack jobs, then our founding fathers, they were doing the same exact thing. They were speaking out against the government. They were trading in gold and silver. They had weapons. They didn't have social media, but they were passing around information on paper, holding meetings in private areas where the government couldn't spy on them. And we see that today in this world, the government is trying to get the people of each country, each government, to take sides. And this is part of their plan. They like to divide the people, and they like them to take different sides. This way, we don't realize who the real problem is. And the real problem is the government, the central bank. Now, we understand that Obama, he went down to Saudi Arabia. He visited the House of Saud. And according to a financial source with very close links to the House of Saud, the United States threatened the prince that night with the most dire consequences if he did not back down on the oil price freeze. An oil production cut would have hindered the U.S. goal of bankrupting Russia. And what this person is saying is this is one of the reasons why they went down there. And then, of course, Saudi Arabia said, well, listen, we're going to start selling these assets. We don't want to do this anymore. Our country is going to go into bankruptcy. We're going to default on everything because we are losing a lot of money every single day. And we know they want to get away from the petrodollar. And we can see right now that Iran, they made it clear that they weren't going to cut oil production. They weren't going to freeze oil production. And the U.S. wants the House of Saud to continually pump oil because they believe it will kill off the competition, Iran. It will keep the economy propped up here in the U.S. They'll prevent the competition from stealing the market share with key energy customers like China. And they'll inflict serious damage to the Russian economy. And Washington was threatening Saudi Arabia. And we can see why all this is occurring at this point. Because we see many countries now, they're saying, okay, we need to start selling assets. We need to move away from the petrodollar. We need to protect ourselves because the system is crumbling and falling apart. And we can't be a part of this. We need to make sure that we are protected. And we see already that the U.S. is getting very nervous. The U.S. is pushing war even harder. And this is not going to stop. This is going to accelerate as we go throughout this year. The U.S. is going to continually to provoke all of these countries. Now, out in Japan, and we've talked about this quite a while, and we talked about it leading up to the point where they passed the law which allows the Japanese military to support U.S. and other allies abroad. And we knew it was coming, and we knew Abe was going to push this. And we see that the Japanese people, they're completely against this. About 700 plus people, and they're suing the Japanese government. And they claim the law violates the right to live in peace. And what they're saying right now is that the people of the country, they don't want to get involved in war around the world. But we understand why they needed to switch this law, because what we're seeing right now is that there's a buildup in the Pacific. We understand, and this has been a big fight in Japan, where they don't want this base being moved in Okinawa because they want this new base to bring in more advanced military weaponry. The people do not want this, and we know the U.S. does. And we see that there's a huge buildup encircling China, and they needed the Japanese government on board so they can go ahead and eventually go to war with China. And they needed Japan to change their laws. And this is what they've done, and they're going to be ready to go once war kicks off. Now, we understand that Yatsenyuk resigned in Ukraine, and it looks like Yatsenyuk left Ukraine. He is out of there. There are reports coming in that he has flown to Latin America. So it looks like the banker that was put into place by Victoria Nuland, he did whatever he had to do there, and now he's completely out of the country, and he does not care anymore. Poroshenko in Ukraine, he is ordering to deploy additional police patrols to the Odessa area, and the governor there is asking for more police because they're worried about riots and the situation in this area. And what we're seeing is that things are really starting to heat up in Ukraine. More shelling is occurring, and it's getting worse and worse as every day that passes. Now, Victoria Nuland, she is in Cyprus, and she is there talking to the president of Cyprus to accept Turkish troops in Cyprus under the NATO flag. And Russia is also there saying, well, just a minute. And Nuland wants Cyprus to cut ties to Russia completely. And we see the U.S. is intensifying the pressure on Cyprus to accept a secret NATO plan to keep Turkish forces on the island. And we see right now that Victoria Nuland is in the middle of all this, just like she was in Ukraine and many other areas, and she is pushing this plan in this area. Now, going back a couple of months, we know that the U.S. had the puppet government and the central bank move the oil ports out of Tripoli, move the central bank eastward to try to sell the oil, and the Tripoli government at that time said, hey, wait a minute. You can't sell the oil. It has to be sold out of Tripoli. And the U.S. was saying, no, we can sell it wherever the central bank is. And the central bank is no longer in Tripoli. We moved it out of there. Now that they have the unity government, we see that other government factions, not the puppet government, the unity government they have, that's in Tripoli, they're trying to sell oil outside of Tripoli. And now the U.S. is saying, well, that can't happen. You can't sell oil outside of Tripoli. This is the only place you can sell oil. And the United States, because of course, as we know, they want to sell the oil not using the dollar, and the United States is a little upset about this. And the whole reason of going into Libya is to keep the entire country on the petrodollar system. Now, out in Iraq, we see that the U.S. is trying the same tactic as Israel. They're doing roof knock bomb warnings in Iraq. According to Major General Peter Gersten, the U.S. is attempting to copy Israel's roof-knocking strategy, but it looks like it's not working out. It doesn't even make sense. They have smaller bombs hitting the rooftops of civilians. They want them to escape the area and flee the area, and then they destroy the infrastructure. Well, in Israel's scenario, we understand what they were doing. They're clearing the infrastructure in the entire area so Israel can move into that area. In Iraq, why are they hitting civilians? Why are they hitting civilian areas? Even if they think there's, I don't know, the Islamic State, which we know that's not what's there. Even if they think the enemy is there, why would you warn them ahead of time unless you're trying to destroy the infrastructure inside the country? And what we're seeing right now is this whole entire scenario doesn't work. All it does is destroy the infrastructure. And right now we see that this is completely illegal under the under international law. You cannot specifically go after civilian locations. And we know that Israel had done that, and we know that the United States is doing the same thing in Iraq at this point. And we know that the United States has done this in Yemen. We know the United States has done this in Syria. And they're violating international law because you can't purposely fire upon civilians. I mean, isn't this what the U.S. keeps saying about Assad, that he's going after civilians? Well, this is what the United States is doing. Now, out in the Mediterranean, the U.S. destroyer Porter, it is conducting weapons training there. And this is part of the U.S. Sixth Fleet. And they are supporting the U.S. national security interests in Europe. And the Porter is an Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer. It has the Aegis battle management system. It's almost identical to the USS Donald Cook. As we know, Russia flew their jets over the USS Donald Cook and knocked out all the electronics in that ship. So we see right now that they are practicing drilling in the Mediterranean because we understand that they're bringing in the warships to Libya off the coast of Syria because we know what's coming. We know there's going to be a major offensive. Now, in the southern province of Syria, the Syrian army detained a car loaded with a large number of Israeli-made weapons. The car was packed to capacity with landmines, RPGs, B-9 grenade launchers, and these were being shipped to the Free Syrian Army, to the Islamic State, to Al-Qaeda. And it looks like weapons are still being moved in through the south, up into Syria. We know weapons are coming in from Turkey, from the north, down into Syria, and also coming from Jordan, from Lebanon, and all these different areas. Now, Lavrov is out there, and he is telling the U.S. to stop using terrorists as a tool to get rid of unwanted political regimes. Because the world knows what the United States is doing now. They know they control the terrorist organizations. And we see right now that they're going to continually use these terrorist organizations to reach their goal. Now, Russia and Syria, they are objecting to Obama sending 250 more special op teams into Syria. They're saying, well, you don't have a mandate from the Syrian government, permission was not granted, and you just invaded a sovereign country with troops. And of course, the U.S. and the coalition forces, they've been doing this for a very long time. Now, President Putin is out there, and he's calling on the entire world to go after terrorists. He's creating a wide anti-terrorist front on a universal international legal basis under the auspices of the UN. And he wants the world to unite against terrorism. Now, we know the U.S. and the coalition forces, they're not going to go along with this because when the U.S. was putting together the coalition forces, Russia, China, they wanted to join, and the U.S. would not accept Russia or China. Now, out in Turkey, the border of Turkey and Syria, we understand the U.S. is supplying Turkey with high mobility missile systems where they're placing it on the border, which will reach about 90 kilometers or so. And we realize that Jay Johnson was in Turkey setting up surveillance equipment, helping them lock down the border or actually protect Turkey for what is about to happen there. And that is war with Syria. And Russia right now has been calling for international observers to be deployed to the Syrian-Turkish border to stop the Islamic State from moving in and out, to stop weapons from moving in and out. And Turkey right now is saying, well, we don't see any reason why we need anyone to be on the borders whatsoever. We don't want them looking into our business. We don't want them to see what we're doing here. And of course, what they're doing there is they are building up for safe zones. They're building up for a major offensive. More and more military weapons are coming in. Military weapons are being being brought in from Turkey through the corridor into Syria, and we see this is continually happening. Now, very interestingly, President Obama is now demanding the active deployment of the German armed forces, including their Army, Navy, and Air Force, to NATO's eastern borders at Poland and the Baltic republics, to join the quadrupling of American forces there. Now, they're bringing them all up to the border of Russia. And this is not a repeat of the Cold War. It's getting forces into position for a possible invasion of Russia, pure and simple. And what we're seeing right now is their plan to go to war with Russia, they're pushing it forward. Now, as things get closer and closer to nuclear war, it's going to be more difficult for either side to back down from it. And this is especially the case with the aggressor, most especially when it falsely claims that it is being aggressed against. And this is the reason why the lies peddled by the political leadership of the West urgently need to be exposed, because we're going to reach that point where there's going to be a war. And once we get into the war and the U.S. is not winning, or the U.S. sees their plan in jeopardy, they're going to resort to their nuclear arsenal. And we cannot let it get that far. We're seeing a lot of countries at this point on high alert. We see the Swedish media reported that officials from local security services are in heightened state of readiness in Sweden. They're very worried about a terrorist attack there. We see the Islamic State has now established cells in the UK, Germany, and Italy. And this is coming from the U.S. Director of National Intelligence. And what we're seeing right now is they are getting ready for this next event, because we're seeing warnings come out of every single area. Now remember, once they give a warning, they just don't go right ahead and they do the event. They wait for people to move out of the area. They wait for everything until everything gets into position. And we see out in Turkey, the U.S. is continually warning, and there's a new warning out there saying that there's credible terrorist threats in the area. Many of the U.S. families should leave. Don't go into these areas. Don't go near the border of Turkey and Syria. So we can see right now things are really moving very quickly at this point. They're getting ready for this next event. Where it will be, we don't know at this point. But we know it's going to be something big, because they need to get this war started as the economy continually falls apart. Now, the U.S. is very worried about the people rising up and going after those people that are in charge right now. And those people, they're nervous. I mean, just go back in time when you had the kings, the queens, and other governments where the people said, okay, we've had enough. We can't take this anymore. And they run up to the castle, they run up to the government building, and they overthrow the government, and they get rid of those officials. Well, we see already the White House has been on lockdown for the second day in a row. And someone jumped a fence, someone threw something over the fence, but you can see they're getting nervous. And each time these type of things happen, they seem to increase the security. Now, for a free and open country, why is the White House so nervous about its own people, where they're setting up spikes, putting in a buffer zone? They shouldn't be this nervous of their own people. And the reason why they're nervous is because they realize they're not working for the people. And the people know this. And eventually what's going to happen is the people are going to get angry, pissed off, and they're going to ask for these government officials to step down. And government people don't like to step down. They believe they're above this. And they use force to push down the people and they try to control the situation. And this is why they're getting so nervous at this point. But we can see right now, when everything starts to really fall apart, deteriorate, the economy collapses, they're trying to kick up war, they're going to be very nervous at this point. And this is their biggest fear. Their biggest fear, it is the people of their country. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.